Realm presents The Vela, Episode 3. When Asala landed on Ganda as a child, so newly 13 that the tattoos on her cheek, marking transition to adolescence, still glistened wetly, she'd made a decision. There were two roads before her. One, grief, a longing that would never abate, because home never left a person. The second road, a better road, life. It meant abandoning the idea of home altogether as a social construct designed to hold people captive to places and traditions long after it was good to do so. Asala had remembered Dosli Saktal Efnaktal. The wind is here, and then it isn't. An epic by the ancient Khwarezmian poet and philosopher Ruxandra Esh. It followed the story of a boy of 16 who, like all Khwarezmians, lived among a nation of nomads, traipsing the planet in search of coolness, moisture, always one step ahead of the sun. His nation, the Seth, had been ruled for a century by one corrupt family. Fearful of change, people were reluctant to oust them. The boy tried to change their minds, but couldn't, eventually leading to a fight to the death between him and King Bet. The boy won, but his people wanted nothing to do with him anymore, and he lived out the next few years in exile until he stumbled upon them once again by accident, and in the night, he attacked their sleeping quarters with fire. Most perished. The children who didn't, he took in. The adults who didn't, he slaughtered. Every year, he and the children returned to the spot, and he would remark, "The wind has blown all that was left of them away." Asala hadn't loved it, struggling with the meter and the ancient language, but it had been the last book that one of the clan mothers had assigned her for her tutorship. When her home mother took her to pack a bag, it was the only book that was out and easy to grab quickly. Asala didn't believe in signs, now as an adult. But at 13, she could see no other reason why, out of all the books, this was the one that had made it all the way with her to Ganda, if it didn't mean something important. Hypatia was no longer home. Ganda was. For a time. Everything was always and only for a time. The wind had blown all that was left of her past away. Hypatia was nothing to her anymore. And as the shuttle bringing them from orbit touched down, Asala unlatched her harness, stood, and took a deep breath the same way she had before that first step onto Ganda decades and decades ago. Hypatia was just another world. The rucksack she'd packed back on the Altair had fallen out of the storage compartment on the journey from the spaceport to the ground. She picked it up and slung it over her broad shoulders. "Not exactly Khaim," said Nico, whose bag was only still in the compartment because the locking mechanism was stuck. They rammed their shoulder several times hard against the metal hold, and it eventually popped open, dropping their bag onto them. Nico caught it before it could do any damage. At least they'd left most of their gratuitous equipment on the ship. "I'm honestly a little surprised we made it to the ground." "As am I," said Asala, buckling the strap of her rucksack around her waist and tightening it more securely than was comfortable. She'd thank herself later. It was a heavy load, and if the auto shuttles were any indication, transportation on Hypatia hadn't improved since she'd left 34 years ago. The two of them might have to hoof it from the shuttleport to Almagest. 9 miles, if memory served. "You may now release your harnesses," said an automated voice as the main doors lifted open on either side of the shuttle. They were in a 6-seater, but the other seats were unoccupied. "You may now stand to retrieve your luggage," said the voice as Nico and Asala exited. In their wake, 30 seconds later, Asala heard, "You may now exit." Nico snorted, and Asala smiled. They were a decent kid. Decent company, too. If they felt any nervousness about touching down on a planet that was pretty hostile to life, they didn't show it. They led the way, following the various signs, their stride confident with no trace of hesitation. Aside from a basic glance at their perimeter, Asala kept focus on reaching their destination. The moving sidewalk they were on that didn't move anymore. The rubber was so worn that the underlying mechanisms were visible in several places, many poking out. Nico's clunky boots caught multiple times. "Don't look so damn smug," they said, noting Asala's footwear, lightweight, flexible boots with thin soles. Asala could easily feel every disturbance on the ground. "Not smug. Right," she said. It wasn't long before they reached Border Patrol, though patrol was a misnomer. It implied a level of vigilance and intensity that was clearly lacking here. Asala counted 20 stalls, 19 of which were empty, which meant there were 19 ways to get around the single guard on duty. Asala was willing to bet any cameras were broken or too greatly dysfunctional to be useful. It was sloppy. Sloppy meant any incident would have a high casualty count. They didn't care about that here. "I half expected there to be flocking droves," said Nico. "There are, just on the other side. Come on, let's get this over with," she said. Asala and Nico ran their wrists under the scanner at the stall, but the guard didn't look up to check that the photos on the holograph matched them. "Reason for your travel?" he asked. In unison, Nico and Asala answered, one saying business and the other pleasure, respectively. "I'm here visiting family," Asala said without thinking. No Hypatian would ever return to visit family. If they could pay to get here, they'd pay to get their loved ones off this rock instead. "And I'm joining her. Planning to get some work done if I can. So both business and pleasure." Nico picked up the nonsense lie, their explanation going on a mite too long. But the guard waved them through. "I don't actually care. Printers are on the ground floor. You'll want some more layers." He sounded mountainish, from the southerly peaks not far from Hypatia's largest city. But from his accent, Asala couldn't pick out which language, let alone which precise clan. Nor did the tattooed design around his eye or the ancestral markings tell her much more. It was strange how knowledge that used to be a piece of her was now out of her grasp. Not that any of that mattered. She wasn't here because she was Hypatian. Asala was the best at what she did, and Ekram and Nico playing her past against her to get her here didn't change that. "How cold are we talking exactly?" Nico walked up to a dingy printer against a wall in the atrium. They banged their fists several times against the touch screen before a basic menu appeared. "Colder than humans can survive without help," Asala said. Almost 40 years ago, it had been unbearable, mass die-off. 4 decades wasn't a lot on the scale of suns and planets, but it was millennia to a world already at the eve of its end. Any food stores there had been were depleted. Hope had shriveled. Aid organizations on the wealthier planets had helped some, and hard-bitten Hypatians pushed to the ends of their endurance had done more. But they were kicking against the crush of a deadly reality. Improvements in clothing and other technology might be staving off the inevitable end, but Nico shouldn't get the wrong idea. They'd spend their time on Hypatia miserably uncomfortable. "Print something light. We're going to want to move fast," said Asala. "Texlon or Sinwool are the warmest and thinnest." Nico shook their head. "Not available. Will Polytex do? It says it's rated for 40 below centigrade." That would have been a balmy summer night on Hypatia a century ago. It hadn't gotten any warmer in the meantime. "That's really all there is?" Asala fought the urge to investigate the machine for herself. It wasn't like Nico didn't know their way around a computer. Damn. All their backup gear was on the Altair. Aside from the Psywool underlayers she and Nico were already wearing, anything Kayami made would have screamed their outsider status. Polytechs would have to do. They'd each have to wear at least 2 bulky insulation coats under a wind shell, and even then they'd better not get caught out overnight. Our ETA? Fuck, said Nico. Can we forego the outer layers for now? Kit up more once we get to where we're going? If you want to die. Nico laughed shortly. All right then. I guess we wait. Smoke, thick and astringent, saturated the air. The hell? Nico asked, rubbing the sting from their eyes. Get back inside, Masala said. You're going to need goggles. There were some on the ready-made racks next to the printers. Nico gave her a sideways glance that said they weren't a fan of the commanding tone, but they nodded curtly and headed back inside. You want a pair? They asked, turning back around just before stepping through the automatic door. Masala shook her head and waited for Nico to turn back away before wiping a few tears from her eyes. She'd get used to the burn, just as she had as a child. Any chance at answers required she blend in. Goggles were for off-worlders and children. Is it the factories or something? Ice mining plants? Nico came back outside, this time with a full face mask meant to filter out the toxic air. Fires, to keep away the Thalajuan, Masala said, the word surprising her on her tongue. The Upper Crescent word for death cold. There were 7 active languages on Hypatia, spoken by 800,000 people scattered about the small planet. There used to be 113. Upper Crescent was the closest they had to a planet-wide lingua franca, being spoken by dwellers of Almagest. It was Hypatia's largest and warmest city, located on the equator. Benzene is plentiful here. Holy! People are burning benzene fires? Asked Nico. Given so much of Hypatia's plant life was dry land and brush, it was far from sensible, and years ago, a benzene fire ran away and scorched a continent. But the people of Hypatia didn't need sensible, they needed to be warm. Asala checked the map on her wristwatch. Like she'd thought, there was nothing for miles. A pub 4 miles away where they'd be lucky to catch a ride. With Nico looking every bit a citizen of Kayam, despite the Hypatian clothing, their chances of finding someone willing to give them a lift were about nil. Did Hypatian still call people from the inner planets innards? We don't stop, said Asala. We can make it to Almagest before dark if we keep it moving. The day is short. We don't want to be stranded in the wilderness at nightfall when the temperature will drop even further. Further? Nico asked. They were already shivering. Asala would be too if every muscle in her body weren't tensed to ward it off. Let's get moving. That'll warm us up. It's about 9 miles. We're walking 9 miles? In these temperatures? If your extremities get numb, let me know. I have chemical heat packs we can crack that'll fit in your gloves or boots. Asala took pity on them and added, When we get there, food is on me. Nico hesitated, then straightened out of their hunched shivering as if determined to be game. Food. Now we're talking. Something hot. Very hot. Asala was looking forward to it too, even though they'd just eaten on the shuttle. She missed the food here. Everything on the inner planets was too spicy or too chewy or too fried, and bulked up with lichen or insect protein. Sometimes succulents or dates, whatever was the most water-light. Until you started to eat among the wealthy, when everything was grain this, grain that to show off their luxury. There was no farming on Hypatia, especially not now that the climate had turned colder, icier. folks lived off hunting, fishing, and shepherding, and dairy. There was some plant life, mostly wild, ground-hugging tundra mosses and dwarf shrubs, enough to provide the fragrant herbs and berries that gave Hypatia's food its distinctive flavor, but sparse compared to land and sea animals. Asala hoped a rich soup of bone broth, blood, marrow, and heart with spicy herbs still awaited in Almagest for those who could afford it, which she could. Now she could. 34 years ago, her family had come to survive on thin soups of discarded fish carcasses scavenged from richer lands. She'd come a long way. The second road. There was no road linking the shuttle port to Hypatia's largest city. They traipsed through hills of low-growing, frost-crusted grasses and rocks. It wasn't long before they saw the Almagest skyline, domed glass buildings meant to catch every bit of light. They didn't pass other travelers. This land belonged to no clan. Too harsh. Asala looked over to Nico. They were struggling. They'd had training, but they hadn't had this much time in the field before. She slapped her hand on their back. "Keep up." "I am keeping up," they said. "Are you?" Asala asked, and picked up her pace, almost doubling her speed. Icy wind flooded her lungs through her nostrils, which only drove her to push harder. "I see why you usually work alone," said Nico. "No fun getting bogged down by us mere mortals." For fun, Asala started jogging. "You've got to be kidding me," Nico said, but they broke into a jog and shortly caught up. "Race you to that shrub," said Asala, goading, breaking into a full sprint. She didn't know why she suddenly felt like a girl again, frolicking like a goddamn child in the hills. But she smiled freely despite the load on her back and a few twinges of pain from old battle injuries. It felt good to be working with someone competent, someone she liked well enough. She had buddies, of course, but it had been a long time since she'd had to spend this much time with someone else. "If we run the rest of the way, we'll get there twice, maybe 3 times as fast. That's 3 times as fast you'll be tucking into herb-roasted marrow and meat cakes." "You found my weakness," said Nico, huffing hard, but keeping up. It wasn't long till they found their rhythm, matching Asala's long strides. The acrid smell of smoke didn't slow her down. It invigorated her. For a second, it was like she'd never left Hypatia, like she'd never cut those memories out of herself. Goodness, it was beautiful. Not in a sentimental way, nothing anyone would write poetry about, but Asala loved the sternness of the landscape, the bleak, barren hills. There was no shine here, no fake shit. It was nothing like Khayyam. And gods, Asala remembered now what it was like to love this place. Remembered the child she was before her home mother had sent her away, abandoned her. "You okay?" The kid was perceptive. They had that going. Even through a goddamn breathing mask and running out of breath, they could tell something had changed. Asala needed to work on keeping her cards to herself. She kept running, faster and faster, leaving Nico in the dust. In Almagest, Nico wanted to rest. They already had booked a reservation under assumed names, but Asala didn't like how comfortable she'd gotten on the way here from the shuttle port. Feeling free, feeling loose, that would get her killed. Hypatia was dangerous. The people she'd be dealing with were dangerous. Now wasn't the time for a misplaced sense of homesickness. "We've already lost a lot of time. First at the shuttle port, waiting for the printer, then getting here. You want to impress Daddy, don't you? We should get a move on, start working the leads now." Asala regretted the dig about their father, but it was out there now, and maybe it would spring the kid into action. The leisure part of this mission was over, and they had a job to do. Can't we at least put away our bags? What, you're tired? She joked, trying to bring some levity back to the situation. You promised me food, they said. We'll grab some saslik on the way to the yard. If the Vela touched down to get repairs, that's where it would have stopped. It's a big space. A square mile, maybe more. We'll have a lot of ground to cover. Nico sighed. Meat on a stick isn't a meal. Meat marinated for a day in buttermilk. Grilled to smoky perfection on a stick, even. Groaning, Nico reclipped the belt of their rucksack around their waist. You're paying. I am, Asala said. Oh, and do me a favor. What? Think you can ditch the mask now. No matter what, you'll stand out, but the mask is too much, even for an off-worlder. We won't get any answers with that on. It wasn't a long walk to the yard, but Asala kept her head down anyway. She didn't have fond memories of Almagest, and things had gotten worse. There weren't any corpses on the street, but in Asala's professional estimation, that wasn't far off. As it was, the streets were littered with lost souls, the exiled, the clanless, people addicted to flash or glow. At least half the shops were abandoned, glass broken and doors unhinged. Nico drew attention, more than Asala liked. Without the proper markings, the proper tattoos, without the right walk, they looked every bit an innard. Let me do the talking, Asala said. I do speak Upper Crescent, said Nico. Of course they did. It was a requirement of the forces to speak at least the main dialects of the system. I know, said Asala, and I can do this. I meant it when I said I had connections here. Asala nodded. She didn't doubt they had more contact with people on Hypatia than she did at this point. You do, but we've got to play to our strengths. And your strength is what? Being more Hypatian than me? Last time I checked, you weren't exactly keen to come back here. Yet it was people just like Nico who'd never let her forget this was the place of her birth. She didn't have to be keen on the place. She didn't have to consider it her home for it to consider her its subject. Nico's expression showed they'd just realized how much their statement of fact had felt like a jab. Because I'm starting to like you, I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Asala said it lightly to dissipate the sudden tension. Nico huffed several breaths. Sorry. That was uncalled for. Forget it. Now come on. There's someone we can talk to right here. She pointed ahead to a woman playing a card game with herself in a junkie booth near the entrance to the yard. Yeah, came the crackly response through the receiver. The woman never looked up from her cards. We'd like to speak with you. Got a couple of questions about a ship that might have passed through here, said Asala, the words mostly fluent, but off somehow. A little stilted, a little flat. The mechanic looked up, giving both Asala and Nico the once-over. Lots of ships pass through here. It is a shipyard. She looked back down and returned to her cards. Can you open the door? Asala asked, realizing her mistake right away. She'd used the word for a house door. For something transient or temporary like this booth, there was a different word. It was a mistake a first-year student in Upper Crescent would make. And this planet was her home, or had been her home. The mechanic glanced up again, this time turning her gaze hard on Asala. Those fake, she asked, pointing to the tattoos on Asala's face. Let us into that booth, Asala said, her accent seeming to get thicker by the second. Asala hated how stupid she sounded in front of this stranger. How un-Hypatian she must seem. This wasn't a security booth. This woman would have let anyone in to do business who looked like a customer of the yard. Apparently, Asala now passed for a native almost as little as Nico did. It shouldn't matter or upset her. It did, though. 34 years, and this planet still had its teeth in her. "Let us in," she repeated. The mechanic relented, opening the door of the booth a tiny crack to allow Asala and Nico in. She didn't want to let any of the heat out. Inside, a tiny electric heater kept her warm. "You're not going to find any answers here," said the mechanic. "Don't doubt what I'm capable of achieving," Asala replied. "What we're capable of achieving," Nico corrected. The mechanic watched Nico for a moment, then turned away dismissively, making it clear that Asala was the only one she was going to speak with. "Maybe I should go search the yard while you stay here. We'll cover more ground that way," said Nico. The mechanic laughed bitterly. "You're not going to have any more luck out there than in here, unless you can somehow give them back all the water Kayam has stolen from us over centuries. Or, I don't know, fix the goddamn sun you destroyed at our expense." Nico looked so hurt. They needed to learn how not to take those kinds of digs so personally. "I'm on your side," they said. That prompted the mechanic to laugh again. "Get out of my booth. Can't believe I let you in here. Get out. And I tell you to get off my planet, but if you stay, maybe we'll get lucky and you'll die here." "You know what? Fine," said Nico. "Nick, it's all right. It's fine. She's just telling the truth anyway. I'm not going to get any leeway here. I'm going to reach out to some of my contacts. Maybe lie low at a pub and see what the gossip is. I'll meet you back at the room tonight once I've got some leads." They'd switched back to High Kayami. Asala restrained herself from shaking her head. If Nico had thought for a few seconds, they'd have realized the mechanic was almost certain to understand that, nearly as well as Upper Crescent. Kayam's power had made their dominant language the one of interplanetary trade. Other planets didn't have the luxury not to learn it. Nico pushed past Asala through the door and stalked off out of the yard. Asala frowned. What was riling their feathers up? As the inner worlder, they couldn't have expected they'd be welcomed on a planet like Hypatia with open arms. And it hadn't been like them to make the slip about language. Nico was smart, and so far, they'd been more or less professional. Maybe they were just tired. "You really trust that kid?" the mechanic asked. "More than I trust you," said Asala. "You haven't exactly been forthright." "Why should I be? Just because you speak local?" The flush of gratification Asala felt embarrassed her. Despite giving her a hard time, the woman did see her as a clanner. After fighting to get away from that identity her whole life, Asala didn't know why she suddenly cared. Maybe she just wanted one single space where she wasn't a foreigner. But this wasn't the time. She cleared her throat and dug into her pockets for some local currency. The mechanic made it disappear and gave a theatrical sigh. "I'm gonna need some more details about the ship you're looking for, but I'm not a rat. I won't be able to give you much. A decent ship, not new, but solid money behind it. Plenty of inner world modifications, and large enough for a few thousand people. Touched down for repairs." The mechanic shook her head. "I'd know if a ship like that entered my yard, and it surely didn't. If it had, half the people in this city would have seen it touch down and would have stampeded the yard trying to get onto it." Asala examined the woman. Short and slight, but big in other ways. Big-spirited, big-eyed, big-mouthed. Reminded Asala of one of her clan mothers. "Look," said the mechanic. "These days, this place is little more than a scrapyard. The only ships in working order are the ones I've personally rebuilt from scratch, and barely any of those can stay together past low orbit. A ship like the one you're looking for. What could any of us here have done for it? Repair a broken valve with what? Look around. Then maybe you stripped it to make a ship that can get to Ganda, Asala said. Especially now. Isn't everyone on the planet scrambling to make the jump while they can? The mechanic barked a laugh. Lady, if I trusted something I built to get across, I'd have been on it. I'd rather the death cold get me than get vacked. Do you know how many of the scrap ships make it? Less than half. And even if you make it over, no one will have us. Least of all those fools keep me busy here. Asala didn't have a response. She'd been one of the ones who'd made it. Doubtless the mechanic had figured that out. She'd never felt lucky about it. She didn't now either, but guilt tingled in the pit of her stomach. What right did she have to be the one who beat the odds? She forced herself back to the mission. There are people on that ship who are important to me to find. Anything you might know, no matter how small, might help. This isn't that ship from Eratos, is it? The mechanic asked, Asala's seriousness about the situation finally sinking in. I haven't seen anything about it on the wire. No news. According to what I've seen, it's still on course. Is there anywhere else on the planet they might have gone for repairs? The mechanic bit her lips and scrunched her brow, thinking. Maybe 100 years ago, when 75% of the planet wasn't abandoned. They're not here. Asala's only lead was already looking like a dead end. Thank you for your time, she said. The mechanic grunted. Asala let herself back out into the endless cold. When Nico wasn't back at the room, nor even checked in according to the computer records, Asala found herself a pub. She couldn't over-imbibe on the job, but she could have a few. It might relax her and make it easier to blend in, which she was apparently doing a poor job at. Hey, someone said. Asala turned. A woman, maybe a few years younger than herself, was smiling from the stool next to her. Looks like you've had a piece of shit day, she said. Asala smiled easily, ready to let off the burden of her time here on Hypatia so far. I'd compliment you on your powers of insight, but I've got to say, piece of shit day seems to be the standard in Almagest. The woman shrugged. I wouldn't know. I'm a country girl through and through. Name's Simya. Asala took a sip of her drink, letting it calm her. Asala, so why Almagest tonight, then? Work, Simya said. And what about you? What brings you here? Work, said Asala. Here's to work, then, said Simya, holding up her glass, which has had the pleasant side effect of bringing us together. Unsure what to do with the compliment, Asala took another drink. I'm sorry. I'm not very good at this. You're really not from Almagest, then? Yeah? Asked Asala. Nodding, Simya took a sip of her drink. If you were, my country girl charms would have already worked on you, and you'd be taking me back to wherever you're staying. Maybe it's because I'm a country girl too, said Asala, only letting herself get partially lost in the conversation. She kept her eyes open. She kept her body faced toward the pub's windows so she could see out onto the street. You don't strike me that way. I can read your eyes. You've seen cities way bigger than Almagest. What you've seen doesn't necessarily say anything about who or what you are, said Asala. It was an empty statement, didn't mean anything really, but she still felt surprised that she'd said it to this essential stranger. At least part of it was true. and she didn't usually say true things to women she met randomly at a bar. She was more tired than she realized. It wasn't the mission. It was Hypatia, hollowing her out emotionally. Okay, so which clan are you from? No, wait, let me guess. Simia squinted her eyes, thinking, your tattoos aren't finished, but I'm going to say you grew up in the mountains, easterly. No, northeasterly. Najima? Gods. Masala didn't usually like being seen through so easily, but it pleased her that there was enough of Hypatia in her that Simia could figure out her clan. You are good. Simia laughed. I am. At many things. Masala did her best to ignore that and had another sip of her drink. It warmed her from the inside. And what about you? Kaikias, said Simia. And what kind of work takes a country girl all the way from the deep south to Almagest? Simia tilted her head, looking almost girlish for a moment. I'm a nurse, actually. Really? I didn't know Hypatia still had nurses. Aside from shopkeepers, people worked the land or fished, reaped as much as they could from the dying world. A few. We're in short supply, so we have to move around a lot. Different hospitals, schools, for the few that are still open, other institutions. Whenever there's any kind of outbreak in a village, different day, different assignment, mostly based around Almagest, but not always. It sounds like you travel a fair bit. That might mean she knew something, even when flirting. Masala's mind was on the job. Simia nodded. As a nurse, if there was a ship that passed through Hypatia with injured peasants on it, would you be someone who was called? Asked Asala. Simia paused, brows scrunched. I mean, yes, I suppose, but something like that wouldn't go through official channels. If I heard about it, I'd go, certainly. And have you heard of something like that recently? Asala didn't bother to hide her intentions, the fact that she was here for information. She sensed Simia wouldn't mind it, that she liked things to be as direct as possible. No, but honestly, ships crash down on Hypatia all the time. We call them Eratossi meteors. There wouldn't typically be any survivors, she said. But what about a nicer ship, capable of automatic navigation? Something hardy. Something paid for by one of the inner planets. Commissioned by the government. Signs of recognition appeared on Simia's face. Maybe it was foolish to give so much away to a stranger, but Asala wouldn't get anything if she didn't give a little. Not the refugee ship? Asked Simia, concerned. Is it... What's happened? Nothing, Asala assured her, but I need to find it. It's lost then? Asala, those were the last Eratossi in the system. It's a lot of people, children, Simia said. Asala did a quick calculation and gently put her hand over Simia's. And I'm going to find them. Is there anything you could tell me that would help me? Simia pulled away and turned to press a few buttons on the service computer, closing out her drink tab. Asala could tell she was stalling. She had medium brown skin, but her tattoos were white. Simia had an easy way about her that the innards might have been surprised by, as it didn't suggest she'd lived her whole life on a planet as cold and unforgiving as Hypatia. Yet her charm and confidence reminded Asala so much of so many women she had known on Hypatia in her own clan. Asala! She turned. Nico was here. Asala straightened herself up, then stood. Where have you been? I've been looking for you, they said. I waited for you. You didn't come. So I moved on with my evening, said Asala. Simya stood up from her bar stool and zipped on her coat. I'm going to let you two work this out. Asala, it was great to meet you. Here's my code. I can't help you with the ship, but if there's any other reason you might want to get together, get in touch, she said, handing Asala a number scrawled on a napkin. I'll do that, said Asala, watching her as she left. Wipe that sloppy grin off your face, she told Nico. Sorry, didn't mean to cock block. Just had a lead, and I've been all over Almagest trying to find you when you weren't back at the inn. Asala should have waited for Nico back in the room. Going to the bar had been a waste of time, and she hadn't really learned anything. More dead ends. She'd let herself get distracted. This place really was getting to her, making her less sharp. Let's get back to the room, she said to Nico. I want to hear what you've found. It was far from a smoking gun, but it was better than anything Asala had gotten. One of Nico's contacts had come through. A couple of days ago, a man had been arrested for selling high-quality rocket fuel, something that could have only come from an inner planet. The only problem is he's been arrested for the crime. He's at Claydaria. Asala slumped in the chair. Fuck. Tell me about it. I did some preliminary investigations. It's not exactly a place we can just walk into for visiting hours. I've been able to track down blueprints, including sublevels, to see if there's access via the plumbing. In many ways, it's more secure than anything on Kayam. Super sophisticated computer security. It was the only thing Ganda had ever given Hypatia in the form of aid, tools to keep Hypatians in. And Hypatia accepted it. In these times of desperation, violent crime was at a record high. Shouldn't you be able to, I don't know, virtually pick the locks? Asala asked. It's tough. I maybe could if I had time, and that's still a big maybe. How much time? I don't know. Weeks? A month? More maybe? And I'd need a lot of help. This isn't going to be easy. If I was on site, and I mean on site, in the facility, I could access the local network and pull it off. Maybe sweet-talk a couple people and get access codes, administrator passwords. But even something like that would take at least days to set up, Nico said, collapsing onto the mattress. Asala laced her fingers together and crossed one leg over the other. There's got to be another way in. You must still have family here, connections. Do you know anyone who could have access? Or someone there, even? Asala shook her head. It's been almost 40 years. I've had no contact with anyone. Nico sat back up and flushed. Asala had the grace not to remind them how thoughtless the question about family had been. After all, they knew all about her family. In looking up Dio, they must have dug into every corner of her past without permission. The silence stretched. Asala let it, leaning into the discomfort. Nico finally got up and went to unwrap a foil packet with some warm food inside. They had the heater on maximum, but it was struggling, and even layered in all their gear, it was still painful. Got one for you, too, Nico said, gesturing to their messenger bag. Asala accepted the peace offering and relented in return. We might be able to use Simya. Simya? What's that? Asked Nico. It's a who. The woman from the pub. She's a nurse, and she works at different sites. She mentioned hospitals and schools, other institutions. Couldn't one of those institutions be a prison? They must need nurses. But they likely wouldn't have any on-site, or if they did, they'd rotate based on need. Nico took a bite of their saslik. Okay, so we have a possible in, but is she up for it? I mean,
You just met.
Asala had gotten the distinct impression Simya was up for anything.
I think she cares a lot about the fate of the people on the Vela. That might be motivation enough. Her potential connection to the prison is pretty tangential. I'm not sure we could even legitimately get her in.
Nico made a face.
But what other option do we have?
It was a stretch, but a stretch was a start, which was more than they had without Simya.
I'll call her, said Asala.
Asala fished out the napkin with the call code on it and dialed. Simya picked up almost immediately.
Yeah?
Is this Simya?
Asked Asala.
Yeah, who's this?
Asala? We met a few hours ago.
Simya's voice warmed.
I didn't expect to hear from you so soon, but I'm glad I have. Would you like to meet up? The night's still young.
I do want to meet up, though, unfortunately, not for what I'd hoped to be calling you for, said Asala.
Nico had that goofy grin back on their face.
More questions about the ship. I told you, I can't help you. I don't know anything. Can you meet me in the lobby of the Dusad? It's only a block from the pub we were at. I know you don't know anything, but there's another way that you can help. You could be part of saving the people on that refugee ship.
Asala heard laughing and other noises in the background. Simya must be at another bar.
Don't try to manipulate me like that. You don't know me. If I had other options, I wouldn't be,
Asala said. The line was silent for several seconds.
I'll meet you. I can't guarantee I can do more for you than that.
Simya was already there waiting for them when they got downstairs. She didn't feel comfortable going back up to the room, so they sat in the deserted lobby, pulling chairs and a coffee table off to the side for some privacy. It was colder down here, and the three of them huddled together around a rattling heater for warmth.
I really did tell you all that I know about the ship. I have no doubt that it may have landed here, but if it did so quickly. It's not here anymore, and you're unlikely to find any traces of it,
said Simya, dressed more conservatively than she'd been at the bar. She had a thick jumper on now, and her hair was concealed underneath a knit hat pulled down to her ears. She had glasses on now, too. Something told Asala she'd been getting toward the end of her night when Asala called, and dressing down for her journey home. It didn't make her any less attractive.
We have a lead about the ship touching down here, but the guy we need to get to is inaccessible,
Asala explained.
What does that have to do with me?
Simya asked, impatient now.
We think it's someplace you might be able to get into, said Nico.
Simya looked confused.
A hospital? She asked. Government building? Shuttleport detainee facility? Am I getting warmer? Cleidaria, said Asala.
Snorting, Simya nodded.
This is what I get for talking to strangers in bars, she said. I can only blame myself. I said I wanted more adventure in my life. As is your will, so may it be, she added.
Asala's home mother used to say that. She hadn't realized it must have been a saying quite common across Hypatia.
I've never been assigned to Cleidaria before. Why would that change just because it's convenient for you?
Simya shifted nervously in her seat, her confidence from earlier beginning to waver.
I can handle that, with a little bit of help from you, if you'd be willing to give me some details, said Nico.
Simya looked skeptical.
I could get in trouble. I'll protect you, said Asala.
She meant it too. These missions carried risk no matter what, but she didn't abide innocent casualties.
I can't do this, Simya said. I'm sorry, but I can't.
She was clutching her coat.
I wouldn't have called if I had literally anyone else, said Asala.
Goodbye, said Simya, and she got up and left. Nico sent out a call to their contacts for anyone who might have a connection to Claydaria, but for days there was nothing. Asala tried to press her memories for anyone who might be able to help, but that well was dry. Nico had managed to access the arrest report, but like all bureaucracy on Hypatia, it was little more than a scribble in a file. Asala had applied for a formal permit to visit the prison, but it had been ignored, which was more or less what she'd expected. Criminals went to Clydaria to rot, and Hypatian authorities cared little about what visitors might want with them. They might have cared more if they'd known it was an official request from the president of Kayam, but if Ekram had wanted that to be common knowledge, he wouldn't have sent Asala. "I've got a few people working with me on trying to access Clydaria's internal network, but we haven't made any headway," Nico said. Neither had Asala. She'd interviewed almost everyone in Almagest, and the only crumbs of information she'd gained pointed right back at their fuel scalper. She discovered his name was Tiak of Fintus, someone from Kayam who'd been an escort to the refugees on the Vela. Their lead had gone from promising to definite, but nobody could tell Asala anything more than that. At least she'd managed to get her and Nico warmer outerwear. The deadly cold wasn't as biting through a better coat. Or maybe she was just getting used to it. If they didn't make progress soon, they were going to run out of time. The orbital window to leave the planet for Gonda had begun to crack open, but it wouldn't be open long. The true scramble would be a few weeks from now, when the journey was shortest. But a few weeks after that, it would begin stretching to impossible for any but the fastest and richest of ships. Even the Altair wasn't a match for what the distance would become. Orbital mechanics was asymmetrical and worked in 4 dimensions. Getting to Hypatia from the inner ring was almost always easy. But if Asala and Nico didn't solve this within the next few weeks, they would have to leave. Asala had no intention of winding up stranded, especially not here. She and Nico were holed up in the room considering their next moves, when Asala's comm alerted her to a call. "Hello?" she answered. "I'll do it," said the voice on the line. It was Simya. "But there's a price." Whatever it was, Asala would pay. She didn't fail missions. She and Nico met with Simya at a hole-in-the-wall cafe, where they didn't bother to exchange pleasantries. "I'll do what you need me to do, but only if you do something for me," she said. "You've got a ship, right?" Nico nodded, and Asala rolled her eyes. She'd have preferred to keep their hand secret. "Then you can get someone off the planet in it, right?" the nurse asked. It wouldn't be easy. The shuttleport would be a nightmare, re-entering Kayam's space even more so. "We can get you out," said Nico. Nico's bleeding heart was all overconfidence when it came to saving people. "We can try to get you off planet," Asala amended. Simya shook her head. No. It's not for me. I need to stay here. There aren't many people left with medical training. It's for my sister." My sister. Dio's face crashed unbidden through Asala's mind. "What?" "My sister," said Simya. Asala inhaled deeply to calm herself, then took a sip of tea, letting the heat fill her body. Her fingers were numb, and the heat from the mug burnt against them pleasantly. Simya leaned forward, her body tense. "Can you do it?" "We can," said Nico. Asala wasn't sure how she felt about having another sister on her conscience, especially someone else's. But they didn't have any other option. After Simya gave Nico all they needed, she was instructed to return to her normal routine. Aside from the occasional message to Asala, she did. For her part, Asala studied. Nico had given her precisely annotated blueprints to go over. When it was time for her to infiltrate, There wouldn't be time for her to second guess or stumble over which way to go. And the only time in the upcoming weeks Nico could get Simya through was 5 days later when the staff rotated. Asala wouldn't know what block or specific cell their lead was in until Nico was able to access the prison's computer system, which they wouldn't be able to do until they executed the plan. She memorized information quickly, but she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She pored over the blueprints over and over and over, using lines from poems, from novels, from sayings, from essays, to build mnemonics to better commit the hallways, doors, gates, and passageways to instant recall. It was now just 1 day before the planned prison break. "Would I be too much of an ass nugget if I asked you to get me some caffeine?" said Nico, as they typed away at multiple computers. They had several programs running, each machine running different protocols and routines. Simya had given them the name of the private medical company she worked for and information about its security. It wasn't enough for a full-on assault, but Nico believed they could get what they needed in time. Of course, Asala hadn't got much sleep herself, but at this juncture, her role was much less intellectually demanding than theirs. She left their room and went out onto the street, layered to the hilt, her hat pulled down over her ears. The cold air burned her lungs. The smell of smoke was pleasant and familiar. Already after a short time, her eyes had grown used to the sting of it. Walking down Orestes Street was almost nice. The smell of breakfast cooking, meat stewing, fish frying, bustling people. She smelled teas and root coffees, herbs, spices. There was a little bit of stink in the air, but few of the more foul smells lingered with the cold and the wind. Asala had rarely ventured here as a child. Like she'd told Simya, she was a country girl from a clan of mountain hags, but she still remembered it from the few times, maybe 3 in total, she'd passed through. It hadn't changed that much in 34 years. A few more abandoned shops, more Hypatians addicted to flash, more beggars, lots more beggars. But the feel was the same. Asala expected her home mother to come out of a shop carrying a bag before rushing Asala along back to a train station, a now defunct line. Almagest, as bad as it was, wasn't a place Asala necessarily had the urge to flee. It was just a city under siege by the cold. Like all of Hypatia, its people's home, beloved. Asala bought Nico a couple of energy drinks from a machine and picked them up some breakfast too. A large container of meatball soup, egg pancakes, yogurt, cheese. They'd both need to load up if they were going to survive today without crashing. No one smiled at Asala as she made her way back to the inn. It was a refreshing change from Kayam, with all its fake pleasantness, where people thought you were some kind of demon incarnate if you didn't look up to exchange a hello. Asala walked up the short flight of stairs back to the room. She tossed a can of 6-shot energy drink to Nico, and they caught it without looking up from their work. "Made some breakthroughs," Nico said. "Was able to get past most of Simya's company's firewalls. The password system isn't that secure, because they're made to change it every month. You'd think that'd make things more difficult to hack, but it just means people are more likely to have variations on the same password over and over again. Dog12341 one month, for example. Then the next dog2345, then dog3456, and so on. It also means people tend to write their passwords down or store them electronically in messages, computer notepads, etc. Those things are on people's personal devices, less secure, and easy for me to hack almost instantly. I've got a program running through emails people sent to themselves looking for specific sorts of combinations of numbers, symbols, and letters. Got some hits, but none for administrators yet. It'll come through. Another couple of hours, tops." Asala nodded and patted them on the back. They'd done good work. She thought back to the mechanic's words at the yard, insinuating Nico wasn't someone Asala could trust. but Nico was working diligently. They were clearly committed to this mission as much as, or more than, Asala herself.
Come on, take a break. You need to eat and so do I. Don't feel like having breakfast alone, she said.
Yeah, just let me finish this one thing, said Nico. They ate together, then took turns in the tiny shower. Tomorrow would be go time, but they still had lots of work for today. Semya was currently at a shift at a triage site for an ice mining accident, an hour outside of Almagest. Tomorrow, she'd be at Clydaria, a tomb in the outskirts, deep in the tundra. Health Plus did supply the medical personnel for Clydaria, 1 on-call physician and 3 on-site nurses for a population of 2,400 inmates. It was a massive facility, a hexagon built into a mountain basin with a domed courtyard in the middle where prisoners had leisure time. Each side of the hex was a cell block, guarded from one another heavily, further subdivided into a maze of 20 wings. Their lead, Teak av Fintus, was somewhere in the labyrinth of it all. Asala hadn't decided whether it was lucky or unlucky that very little of the security was actually human staff. It was fewer people to evade, but it made for an increased artificial intelligence presence. More bioscanners, more cameras, an automated system.
Ready?
Asala asked Simya. They had met in the room at the inn, but for Simya's safety would be parting ways after this point, traveling a few minutes apart, taking different routes. It wasn't much of a precaution if someone were trying. They'd easily be able to connect the two of them. But no one was trying.
I'm ready. I don't actually have to do anything, do I? Just carry in the transmitter, plug it into a hard line, go about my nursing duties with no one the wiser, right? I'm just pretending to charge my cellular device, no big deal. No reason to arouse anyone's suspicions.
She looked up at them then, her brown eyes wide.
And then you get my sister out, right? You promise? She's ready to go. She's already in Almagest. She travelled far to get here, and you can't let her down.
Asala grabbed each of Simya's shoulders.
It's going to be fine.
Simya looked away.
You can't know that, Asala. I can. After 30 years of doing what I've been doing, I absolutely can, she said.
Right, said Simya.
How do I look?
Asala took in her loose-fitting white scrubs, her braided hair pulled up into a tight bun.
Good. You look like a nurse. You look reasonably calm. It's your first day at Clydaria, so that'll explain any anxiousness when they do a bioscan of you to check your identity, said Asala. You need to get your train. It's a 3-mile walk. I'll be getting on at a different stop, 5 miles in the other direction. I'll be arriving about 10 or 15 minutes after you. Nico's already there on the ground, setting up at a location not far from the perimeter of the prison. All our comm lines are open, and we'll have eyes on you. You've got your bugs set up?
Check, Simya said, patting herself, as if to confirm the near-microscopic devices by feel.
They'll give us eyes and ears. Don't activate them until after you've passed through all the scanners. 1 or 2 at a time at the most. Remember, almost every gate or entryway between wings and sections have scanners that will pick up your bugs if they're on. So deactivate before you approach any one of those. Hopefully you'll just be stationed in the infirmary and won't have to go anywhere else on the site, said Asala, zipping on a tight, thick black hoodie insulated with kinetalon. It would keep her warm in temperatures below -40 degrees centigrade. She put on another one over it, then put on a coat over that. Gloves, hat. Truthfully, she didn't know what would happen after they got to Teak, or how long she and Nico would be out in the cold tonight. They'd make contact with Simya's sister when they were clear of the authorities, then rendezvous before heading back to the Altair. She strapped on her sidearm and checked the backups at her ankle and in her coat. Let's go. The Skyrail link connecting Almagest to Claydaria and a few other major centers was one of the few lines that was still maintained and something like functional. Delays were frequent, but that was why they were getting such an early start. The Skyrail was suspended on thick wires in the sky with a little less than 100 meters altitude. Asala could see everything: mountains, endless mountains, and sloping hills that beckoned, deep valleys, snow-streaked plains. Despite all that had befallen Hypatia since this crisis had begun, the planet entranced and captivated. Asala had spent more time off this planet than on it, but there was no doubt as she looked at the harsh landscape that it had made her. The train rattled, a wrenching, high-pitched whistle emanating from above. They were traveling at decently high speeds. If this kept up, they would complete the 35-mile journey in about 20 minutes. She sat with her head bowed down, hoodie drawn over to obscure her face. Nico said they would disable all the cameras that they could, but Asala was old school and liked to make sure her bases were covered. Today she was thankful for the tattoo she'd had such an uneasy relationship with all her life. If anyone saw her, they wouldn't recognize her as someone sent from Kayam. After the train pulled in, Asala got into position in one of the blind spots she and Nico had identified from the blueprints, plans, and topographical maps. Her radio was on. Her guns, all three, were holstered. If everything was going according to plan, Simya was already in, probably just about through the security checks. Once inside, she would plug in the device Nico had given her to connect to the prison's hardline, so Nico could hack into their network and open the passages that needed opening for Asala to infiltrate. "Gamma, you copy?" asked Asala, making sure she was tuned to the right frequency.
"Aye, copy, Alpha,"
Nico said.
"Just got eyes and ears on our girl. All is a go. I'll let you know once we're ready for Phase 2. Beta is now headed to where the package will be delivered."
The vague codes they used were far from indecipherable, but sometimes all that was needed was a small layer of concealment to blur reality and buy time. Not that anyone would be able to hear them. Nico promised to take care of that.
"All right, package is in. Let me work my magic. First order of business, smash out their eyes."
This was Asala's time to go. The cameras surrounding the perimeter would only be disabled for a short amount of time, 2 minutes, enough for her to get to a utility door at a side entrance, but hopefully not long enough that the prison's AI would recognize the looped video Nico was feeding it in the live feed's stead.
"And go,"
said Nico. "Copy." Asala sprinted. In many ways, Claydaria was as deserted as the shuttle port had been. She didn't have to attempt to blend in. Any guards were inside. Most of the security was computer-based.
"Cameras are going back in 10, 9, 8.
Nico began to count down. Several meters from the door, Asala pumped it up a notch, pushing herself to move harder and faster.
4, 3, 2.
Asala was at the thick, heavy utility door, but she knew it wouldn't be open yet. Nico could only enter one system at a time.
"Your girl is good, by the way.
Said Nico.
Going about her business, hasn't raised any suspicions. Doing a check of the systems now, and it looks like the AI did notice the camera anomalies with the looped feed and are sending 2 guards to do a sweep of the perimeter."
Tell me you'll have that door open for me before that.
"I'm trying."
Nico's voice was tight. Asala could imagine them typing away furiously.
"Each door has a separate set of protocols. It's taking longer than I thought,"
they said.
1 second, let me try something. Okay, got the password. Just a couple more. And okay, open.
Asala heard the magnetic latches give and slid into the doorway just as she heard guards approaching on their patrol from the main entrance.
You in?
Asked Nico. In. Asala heard Nico lock the door behind her. Even though it took more time, they had to cover up their tracks as instantly as possible, as the AI did regular sweeps of the system to check for breaks in pattern. A door quickly unlocked and relocked meant a guard or maintenance member was accessing a side door. A door left unlocked meant trouble. Asala followed the route she'd memorized from the blueprint, trusting that Nico was disabling the bioscanners and cameras one by one as she followed the complicated maze through the basement level to access the main levels where Teok would be. Nico's voice came over her earpiece.
All right, he's in F block, cell 104. There's still half an hour before they'll be let out for breakfast, at which time their cell doors will automatically open and a bioscan sweep will log them in for the day. I don't think I'm going to be able to override that system because there's zero manual access. So you need to be out before then. Period.
Asala was in A block. She was going to have to run hard if she was going to make that window.
I'm going to be moving fast. You got all the security checks covered?
Gonna turn all the scanners and cameras off at once. That's the only way I can keep up. Go,
said Nico. Asala ran as fast as she could, sprinting down corridors, making the turns she knew she needed to make. It wasn't easy to translate the lines and squares from the blueprints to real life on the move, but it also wasn't Asala's first break-in. She didn't make wrong turns. F block was quiet and dark, but Asala could feel that most of the inmates were already awake. Their breaths weren't long, slow, and even like sleepers would be. There were no husky snores. Eyes scanned here from the cells, but no one spoke. Asala had never been in a prison that felt like this. No whistles, no smack talk.
Teok,
she tried, her steps quiet and steady. She only had about 10 minutes.
Teok of Fintus,
she asked again, more confidently this time.
I need to speak with Teok of Fintus now.
What? She made her way to cell 104. Teok was already standing up and facing her.
We don't have much time. I need answers. No bullshit, no stalling. If you don't give me what I want, I suspect you'll be the one to suffer for my being here. I can get out. You're trapped behind a door, said Asala.
Not for much longer, Teok sneered. He was gruffer than Asala expected. No tattoos. No doubt this jail wasn't a kind place. Even after a few weeks, it already had taken its toll on him.
Do you want to try me? Remember the mission.
Nico had said she only had a little bit of time. She had to be out of here by the morning bioscan sweeps.
I suspect you know what I'm here about. Do you have anything to lose by cutting through the shit and telling me what I need to know?
The volume in the cell wing rose as prisoners began to chatter and mill around their cells.
Can you get me out of here?
Teok asked. She didn't necessarily want to, but they'd known all along their leverage was poor, and escape would have to be on the table. Besides, the guy was locked up in this shithole just for selling stolen fuel. Her conscience would be clear.
We can talk about that if you tell me what went down on the Vela. What happened after you touched down here for repairs? Did you go to the yard? Where's the Vela now?
Look, said Teok. Me and a couple of other escorts were pretty suspicious when the captain noted the ship needed repairs. I mean, the Vela had been all knitted out and double-checked. Our journey had been smooth. I noticed a couple of the refugees are acting a bit squirrely. One in particular. And I know from the manifest she's some famous physicist. He was talking about Uzochi. Asala had heard of her through her mother, but more recently, she remembered her from the refugee profiles she'd watched back on the Altair. What stupid thing had Uzochi Ryota done And what had it cost the refugees? She was a real smarty type, said Teak. She could have easily manufactured the damage to the ship's systems and drives on purpose, right? I don't know. She acted funny since she first got on the ship, like she thought something was wrong. I mean, we were overcrowded for sure. No doubt Akram underestimated the sheer number of them there'd be. But the ship was in no danger. It was built to carry loads way bigger than that. Anyway, so I confront her when we're about to dock into the in-orbit shuttle port on Hypatia. I don't know, I'm not even thinking it's a big deal, but bam, full-on fucking mutiny. Every single refugee. There were only a few of us escorts, you know. We weren't expecting to need hard security. My team got overpowered quick. His face folded in harder. They let me out with the rest of the team. A little worse for wear, or kicked us out, depending on how you look at it. This crap-ass planet's government is in shambles. They knew no one here would care. Before they shoved off again, I decided to do a little something nice for myself and got the fuel. Figured if I was stuck here, I'd need a way to get money to book my passage home. Masala shook her head. Fuck. These refugees had been on their way to a cushy life on Kayam. Politics had been playing in their favor for once. So there was no reason they would have mutinied against their escorts, unless they had another goal in mind, a violent one. She needed to get out of here, and she needed to call the president right away.
Alpha, you clear?
Shit, said Asala.
Don't tell me you're still in the cell block.
How bad is it?
You're going to get caught in the auto bioscan, and it's going to trigger an alarm. Nothing I can do to stop it. I'm going to cause a distraction, but Alpha, you need to run. Go, run!
At least Asala had what she needed. She ran for her life, alarms blaring at high pitch overhead. She wasn't the only one sprinting. Thanks to Nico, every gate and door in Claydaria had opened. As she ran, she used her comm to call President Ekram. She didn't know how much time they had. She needed to get word to him quickly what was going on. He didn't answer. She left a message. You need to get people out here. I think the refugees from the Vela are planning a terrorist attack.
Alpha?
Copy, said Asala. I'm approaching the utility door now. Head to the train station as fast as you can. I'll meet you there. Got guards on my tail. No doubt they have personal vehicles. If you can buy us any time...
I've been looking for an excuse to use an EMP,
they said, tone unsettlingly cheerful. You can't cut out the train. That's our exit strategy, gritted Asala, barely able to get the words out as she sprinted.
A baby EMP,
Nico protested. Fetus, really. Asala rolled her eyes and kept running at breakneck speeds. Call Simia's sister. Let her know we're proceeding more quickly than planned. If I don't see you at the train, meet me at the yard. We're not going to be able to get back to our ship. We don't have the time. But that mechanic at the yard said she'd refurbished a couple of vessels. We're going to be requisitioning one. Adrenaline rushed to Sala as she made the journey back to the city, anxious when she didn't see Nico on the train. The EMP had cut off her radio before she'd cleared the prison. She had no way of getting in touch. She tried her comm. The stored and downloaded functions worked, but she couldn't get a call out. She did have a return message from Ekram that he'd left while she'd been busy not getting caught. Asala, get back to me as soon as you can. I need specifics, times, locations. Asala, what the hell is going on? Asala tried to call him again, but it was no use. At least the train trip went by fast. Once she got to the rendezvous point, there was still no Nico. She waited for them for 15 minutes at the yard, where there was no sign of Simia either. An alarm blaring back at Claydaria reached them faintly even here, putting everyone on high alert. Asala pretended to be tinkering on a scrapped ship when authorities ran by. Finally, She saw Nico running. "Go!" they shouted. She followed after them. "We need to find a working ship. We don't have time. Look." Nico pointed behind them, up outside the yard. Their face was plastered in holograph in the center of the city with the word "Wanted" above. "According to one of my people here, there's a junker with a boatload of refugees leaving in 3 minutes in the east section of the yard. We need to be on it. I told Simya's sister. She's on her way." Asala ran as fast as she could. The ship's doors were already closing when they spotted it. "Go!" shouted Nico again. "You got a ticket?" someone asked. "We can pay," said Asala. The man took a look at her and decided she looked moneyed enough to believe it. "All right, get on." He pushed the button to resume shutting the door. "Wait!" Asala grabbed his arm. "We're waiting for one more person." Asala frantically scanned the anxious crowd, comparing their faces to the image capture of Simya's sister she'd seen. "She'll be here any minute." "No can do," the man said, and he shoved her off. Over Asala's shout and Nico's outraged cry, he pressed the button to close the door, and they were off and away. Simya's sister left behind.
You're listening to The Vela, narrated by Robin Miles. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. The Vela is written by Yoon Ha Lee, Becky Chambers, S.L. Huang, and Rivers Solomon. Executive produced by Molly Barton, Lydia Sharma, and Julian Yap. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.